Good morning and good afternoon to our friends in Europe. I'm Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis, joining you from Washington, D.C. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this live event with the President of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid. This event is part of a series, of high-level conversations the SIPA is hosting to raise awareness on how European countries are responding to the evolving COVID-19 crisis. Estonia has been a digital pioneer for years, and in the face of the crisis, the country has stood out as a leading example of resilience and cohesion. Estonia's capabilities in combating disinformation, e-governance, and protecting critical infrastructure and public services have played an important part in the country's response to the coronavirus outbreak. On the world stage, the upcoming 3C summit in the fall and the country's incoming presidency in the UN Security Council highlights Estonia's commitment to development and problem solving in transparent multilateral frameworks. There's certainly a lot on your plate, Madam President, so thank you for taking the time to join us today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my SIPA colleague, Senior Fellow Edward Lucas, whom some of you know from his years as Senior Editor of The Economist and author of many books on cybercraft, Russia, influence operations, including the 2015 Cyberphobia. Edward, over to you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Alina, and welcome to all the people who are watching this, whether they've signed up on Zoom or watching on the YouTube live stream. I'm in London, Alina and the SIPA colleagues are in Washington, DC and also in Warsaw, and President Kaljulaid is in Estonia. And I want to kick off, Madam President, with the topic that Alina just highlighted of the role of digital governance in the resilience that we're all searching for as we deal with the coronavirus pandemic. You spearheaded Estonia's efforts to get a very coveted role as president of the, to be on the UN Security Council, and you're now the president. And I think that you are in the hot seat there, and you've also got your favorite hot topic has just come up. So just tell us a bit about what's going on in the Security Council right now.
Indeed, it's true that now we are in the really truly hot seat, which means our first ever presidency of the Security Council is starting. But in fact, our most important campaign promise, which was we will take the cyber issues directly to the Security Council, because we need to start creating precedences to create international law on how we handle attacks against states and their sovereignty via cyber means. And an opportunity presented itself already in March, where supported by UK and US, Estonia took an attack against Georgia by Russia to the Security Council. It was discussed and it was also attributed there to Russia. So we fulfilled our most important campaign promise already before we got into the hot seat. But our hot seat now is, of course, virtual, like everything in United Nations is virtual. And this is amazing because we remember how many secretariats of international organizations have always insisted on physical presence. Now, suddenly everybody is pretty relaxed about not having physical presence.
I remember about 20 years ago, you were taking me around the Estonian government building and showing me the cabinet room where you were having could have virtual cabinet meetings. This was an absolute first in those days, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't completely believe it was possible. And now the circle of history turns, and you're doing the same at the United Nations. But let's just spend a little time talking about Estonia's response to the pandemic, because you have the advantage of a very cohesive society with high levels of trust, close integration between public and private sectors, and an excellent digital infrastructure. How's that played out in your response to the pandemic?
Estonian citizens have really acted responsibly. And I think we and together other citizens of the free world, we have demonstrated that grown-up citizens, when informed well, take right decisions. They don't have to be ordered inside. They do take necessary precautions and distance themselves. In a way, we are quite similar to Sweden. Yes, we have a slightly stricter regime in place, but let's be honest, it cannot be enforced. It can only be, convincing of our people that this is what we need to do. And we managed really quickly to suppress the numbers before they got really horrifying. We were not, well, horrified by our own experience. We were by the others, and we are deeply saddened by the experience of Italy, Spain, Britain, and US, of course. But there was also an element of luck. We had a couple of weeks of warning because it started elsewhere, and we reacted to it well and quickly. The most important innovation, if we come to digital here, is that since we have e-health system anyway, then previously when you were sick, you went to your doctor's office, your doctor confirmed you're sick and started your sick leave. Now we opened the system so that the citizen starts their own sick leave when they feel sick. Then the doctor calls in, confirms the symptoms and confirms the start of the sick leave. So we could actually use our digital infrastructure to make life even easier in Estonia.
One of the paradoxes of the pandemic is that it's both put a stress on our ability to practice resilience and cohesion at home, but it's also intensified geopolitical competition. We've seen both Russia and China in their different ways trying to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented. And of course, Estonia is no stranger to this. You've been the subject of particularly Russian, but also Chinese pressure over the years. Do you feel the wind blowing especially coldly at the moment?
Actually, maybe because we're not alien to understanding and thinking about these things, we take it now much easier in the Security Council, when of course as well we see these elements of this strain playing themselves out right now. Well, first of all, for us, everything, whatever we talk, economy, health, it's all about security. And if you think about the regional security, then we had also to postpone and do on lesser scale some military exercises. Yet again, we've had constant affirmation by Jens Stoltenberg and others at NATO and the ministers of defense and foreign affairs that we will, if necessary, fight even with the fever.
Estonia's got another big diplomatic job at the moment, which is you are the incumbent president or lead on the 3 Cs, which we used to call the 3 Cs initiative, but that sounded a bit provisional. So I understand it's now just called the 3 Cs. That's the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Adriatic, and the countries in between. I was hoping around now, I think, to be setting off to the 3 Cs summit in Tallinn, but that's been postponed until the fall. But not many people have heard of the 3 Cs, perhaps unfairly. It's a very important initiative to strengthen the connectivity of these countries, and also to push back against Chinese influence. China has this 17+1 format, which has its own, what one might call politely, specific characteristics. What's the Estonian agenda for the 3 Cs?
It's so interesting. 3 Cs initiative, initially, particularly from United States, was supported because there was this worry about Chinese capital taking over Eastern European countries, which, by the way, within the European Union is not possible because you have your procurement and competition ruling. And under these conditions, we have seen it ourselves. Chinese capital is not so interested at all. But something good has come out of this initiative nevertheless, because these countries, actually, they are growing at the speed which is double of the euro area. Part of them are themselves euro area, but not everybody. And the growth speed is much quicker, and marketed together is this region of 102 million people, quicker growth, guaranteed cohesion towards Western European living standards because they are part of the EU market. They're part of the EU market, which means that there are no borders between them. At least in normal times, there are no borders in between them, which means you can treat them as one economic area. So there is ample reason to invest into the region. But each and every country in the region is maybe a little bit too small for bigger investors to look at them. So marketed together and collectively, this is a really attractive proposal for private capital. And for me, as you know, I'm a free market supporter. And I have always felt a little bit worried that people think that development in societies, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, can only happen if public sector takes the responsibility. Public sector takes out the debt and finances connections. European Union gives grants to poorer neighborhood and finances connections. This initiative will prove the concept that private capital can actually develop the region. The projects will be very similar to those which European Union is also supporting, but there will be one difference. These are the projects, very often they are also well cited by the EU projects where there is no return on investment, but they will all have a return on investment. So they are true market-oriented projects which Free Seas is doing. And Free Seas is also beneficial in this sense that our understanding in our fund, which we have all participants put in also in the rules of financing, is that you can also go into neighboring country. If one end of a project, and it's mostly meant for cross-border development anyway, if one end is in Free Seas country, the other can be, for example, in Ukraine, which gives capital, let's say, a relatively risk-free excursion to the Ukrainian market, which is less known, but actually very attractive if you look at the growth potential of the markets. So from the initiative started by Presidents Grabar, Kitarovic, and Duda, we have come to an initiative which also has a foundation, which is a private capital management foundation. Amber Capital is the fund manager, and everybody can invest into the fund in order to actually earn return on their investment and forward the development of the Free Seas region.
The Three Seas is very encouraging also because it continues to have American backing. It's part of the US commitment to Europe, both on the economic side and on what one might call the geostrategic side. And I suppose there's a particular importance here, which is that people are having second thoughts about their supply chains in China. And if you want to have a bit of onshoring and bring your supply chain back from China, then what one might call low-cost Europe in the Three Seas area, although it's not all low cost, obviously has some advantages. I'm
not so sure. You know, remember 25 years ago, all of our countries here in Eastern Europe were seeing people coming and asking us, what special treatment will you give our capital in order we build our car factory in your country? Estonians were the ones who said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have special treatment to any capital. Each and every capital is treated equally. You do not gain any tax and other advantages. Well, our economic climate is good. You're all welcome. And as a result, we do not have right now these production facilities which could only survive at really low salary levels coupled with state special initiatives. We don't have that. Yeah. So I don't think that we will be seeing a huge amount of kind of publicly supported and special conditions developments. I think everybody has learned from it. But of course, regionalization, by the way, was going on in the world already before this crisis. And by the way, before Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, regionalization was already happening. I'm sure, like in every crisis, the trends will just, go quicker. They are not really created by the crisis. So this is definitely a trend. But the countries, Free Seas countries, lack infrastructure which connects these countries to each other. They are well connected between West and East, a little bit like every African country is connected to the seashore because they needed to export to the richer countries. Very similarly, we are very well connected East-West, but North-South connections between these countries are less developed, and we need them. And I saw a very interesting proposal for a waterway, Baltic Black Sea waterway, which I think is on the Three Seas website. But we have people watching on Zoom and on YouTube, and some of them are submitting questions. And there's a very topical one from Valeria Jägersman, who says Russia recently submitted a resolution calling for unilateral sanctions to be stopped without the UN Security Council consent. Now, this failed. But what diplomatic efforts are you seeing from Russia at the UN right now? And perhaps that might also be a chance to highlight your joint statement with the other two Baltic states on May the 9th, which was going to be Putin's big party in Russia, highlighting the Soviet war myth or version of history. So talk us through the war of words with Russia at the moment. Yes, I will actually stay clear of any concrete topic, but I can tell you that as a newcomer to Security Council, for me personally, it's been very interesting to follow how those who are very used to sitting in Security Council are able to find procedural clogs to throw into your machinery in order to try to stop or turn the events you are foreseeing for the discussions. We organized a discussion on human rights in Crimea, and while we were organizing, I happened to be in the town, and it was actually beautiful technical diplomacy which I was seeing. Somebody was trying to make sure that somebody else will not have the capacity to do a meeting in order, to discuss something by purely technical means. We are so sorry, there cannot be translation, there cannot be this, and then it was beautiful to see how resilient is the will of the free and democratic nations to have at least open discussions, even if we cannot have, of course, good and concrete results, but at least we managed to get discussions. And this is very important. Now you mentioned also the Free Baltic Presidents paper, which we did indeed release. I mean, we have been worried about the tries to rewrite history. And also for many nations, indeed, I mean, the Second World War ended 75 years ago, but for us, it ended 1994 when the last troops of the Soviet Union left our countries. So for us, there's nothing to celebrate. So this paper is a celebration of having nothing to celebrate together with other nations. We need to remember this as well.
There's a question just come in from Karin Shui from the Estonian American National Council, which does a great job in promoting Estonian image and profile in the United States. And she says, please comment on the Kremlin's disinformation and other malign campaigns against the West related to COVID-19. And then there's a follow-up. Is China also engaging in virus-related influence operations?
Well, as we know in this current world, and we hope that through our adventures in Security Council, we'll manage to change this. But right now, I mean, there is no need to bother with attribution of disinformation or attacks or cyber attacks, because there is no place globally where you could go and complain about this. There is no political gain. So most people don't bother to attribute even the attacks they are receiving. This applies both for cyber conventional, which is then attacks against technical system, and also for hybrid. A lot of rumors are circulating, and easier is to simply to say they're not true and try to make sure that people learn that in internet information's for fun unless you really know who put it out there. And the only way out of this situation, in fact, is taking anonymity out of internet. And this is the obligation of governments, to give identity to their people in internet. You have an identity in internet because you are the first Estonian e-resident. So for a long time, you have been able to make sure that other people who think they talk to you really can verify they are talking to you. And we cannot leave this important element of cybersecurity to Facebook and Google and Amazon. Not because they are not great firms, they are great firms, but the legal power belongs to governments. Governments are responsible for identities, for passports, both in analog world and in internet. This is how the world should be. And I'm quite sure that this crisis has amply demonstrated that this is necessity, even outside of the European Union. European Union recognized this already in 2017 during Estonian Council presidency. They realized this must happen. We have EIDAS system, which allows us to recognize our digital identities, provided our governments give them to people. Not each and everyone does yet. But we are already on the way. This concept is far less developed in America, for example. It needs to start developing. There must be an opportunity to have internet where you know with whom you're talking and you are secure, because signing gives you encryption as well. And the internet for fun, where you can read weird people propagating weird things about vaccines, the shape of the earth, and also about the coronavirus.
Yes, I feel at this stage I should just highlight this is indeed the first Estonian digital identity card issued to a foreigner. And it means that you and I, Madam President, can exchange emails with the assurance that it really is coming from me or from you, and we can encrypt it in a way that only the other one can read it. And this is something that holders of these Estonian digital IDs take for granted, and for everyone else in the world it looks pretty much like witchcraft, although obviously some countries are trying to catch up on that. We have another question from my SIPA colleague Mikael Hamata, who says, how does Estonia hope to push forward its UN cyber platform if adversarial states like Russia and increasingly China are flexing their control over international institutions? And I might add a rider to that we see a particular example with Taiwan, which has had an exemplary record in dealing with the coronavirus and has really, I think, scored perhaps better than almost any other country, despite its proximity to the outbreak, but is being systematically excluded from the World Health Organization, the World Health Assembly, and other things, when we presumably would have quite a lot to learn from their example, and that's is the direct result of Chinese mainland China's diplomatic pressure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the United Nations Security Council and the cyber, indeed, it's very hard through United Nations Working Group. I think it has been tried 6 times at least to come to a common conclusions on how to handle these issues. But we choose an opportunity to go supported by our allies under any other business and create a precedent. And this precedent is now there. So next time somebody wants to discuss a cyber attack against their sovereignty and attribute it in Security Council, there is precedent. And they should be able to find other people who will support their objective to discuss it. We're also having a more theoretical or more grounded debate on 22nd of May on cyber issues in Security Council. So our move was a little bit of, unprecedented in this sense that nobody had thought that you could also achieve results this way, but you can. And this is, next time, of course, exactly the same trick probably wouldn't work, but finding a good procedure and good company, you can do things, even in Security Council, which is indeed held very often hostage to the feelings and thinking of the P5. There is no getting away from it. About Taiwan and about some other countries who have been controlling the pandemic really well, it's interesting to see how in Estonia this discussion has been more even concentrated on the security of data than, I mean, not only in these countries, but today I would even say that I'm in Germany, which is traditionally extremely careful with people's personal data. But because people lack the experience of handling their data into the hands of the government, and they have never got from their government these exact promises which Estonian citizens have, like your data is yours, you will be informed who looked at it, and so on. They've not been asking questions which Estonians have been asking during this pandemic. How do we want our state to be able to point out that you or I, somebody has been close to somebody who has this virus? And this discussion here by citizens has been much harder to have for the politicians, I can tell you, mainly because of our long experience that state can have data, but has to promise us how we still are safe, how to deal it in this way that, yes, people who need to know they have been in contact with somebody wouldn't know that somebody is me. In a not so densely populated country like Estonia with low number of population, this is not an easy equation to solve.
We've got another question from Eleanor Anderson, who says, how have US-Estonian and indeed US-Baltic relations developed since the Wales Declaration, which for those of people who listeners and viewers who don't follow is extremely important declaration that the United States didn't recognize the annexation of the 3 Baltic states into the Soviet Union. And she asks, what can the US and the transatlantic community do particularly to support Estonia and the other Baltic states against Russia's increasing aggression and disinformation campaign? And then there's another question, which is from Carl Altau from JBank, another great Baltic American group, which is what's up with Rail Baltica and the Baltic energy connectors? Because I did see a thing on the internet, which of course one should always believe one sees on the internet, but I think an Estonian politician saying that Rail Baltica is now going to be paused because of the pandemic. So what can America do, and what's the status of these very important interconnection projects?
On interconnection project, I would like to cite one Estonian minister whom I would not like to name, is that sometimes your win in international diplomacy is that if by the evening people realize that some of your ministers are populists. He used another word, but I replaced it with populist. Rail Baltica is going on as planned. Prime Minister has reassured us, everybody, that if it's written in the coalition agreement that this government supports it, then this government supports it. And I'm deeply ashamed that we have populists like everybody else has them. I mean, this is unprincipled and in my understanding, totally unnecessary, creation of confusion. But some people are like this, and other people have voted for them because they believe there must be simple solutions, or because that we, the mainstreamers, have missed for quite a long time that the side effects of the development in society need to be managed as well. I believe this is exactly the same as Brexit or Gilets jaunes. No difference. In Estonia, it's the discussion about Rail Baltic. It will go ahead, I am quite sure. Well, I'm quite sure that the European Union will also support this development of the north-south transport corridors. It's not our project, it's our common project. And nobody should be worried, but I understand if they are, why they are. Now to the Wells Declaration and the later development. I have a very short answer. I'm actually going to cite Donald Trump. We have never let you down. We will never let you down. Donald Trump at the press conference when we celebrated the cooperation between Baltic states and the United States a couple of years ago. And this is true. We have never been let down. And we believe this will continue. Because, you know, whatever the differences, and I'm quite sure this will apply not only to Estonian and Baltic-US relations, but to the European-US relations as well. Whatever our differences of opinion, the basic foundations of our societies are the same and will remain much more the same than with any other group or population of states globally than liberal democratic countries. This will not change.
Just as a final question, let's just pick up on the question of why people vote for populists and the what I might loosely call anti-systemic politicians. I feel that the people who've run the world since 1991 have something to answer for, because we inherited this incredible climate where people said liberal democracy is the only system going, free market economy is the only system going, globalization is irreversible and it's going to be good for everyone. And 30 years on, there's a large slice of the population which says we don't like any of that. We don't trust the media, we don't trust politicians, we don't like the way the pain of globalization is shared, and we don't think the system works for us. And that's why we vote for the people who you've mentioned both in Estonia and France and elsewhere. So perhaps this is my final question, perhaps the pandemic offers us a chance to rethink the way our system works a bit and try and blunt the edges of that dissatisfaction. Do you see any particular priorities that we should, as we move out of the lockdown and into the post-pandemic area, what should our priorities be?
First of all, I believe that in this crisis particularly, the European approach of social market economy has been proved as the one which guarantees and maximizes the safety and security of the society. We've known it instinctively, but this has now been proved. You need a national health system with huge coverage of our people in order to handle the pandemics. You need an education system which is equal, which gives in each and every school to each and every child, never mind how rich or poor their parents are, never mind whether it's in capital or in rural area, an education which is good enough to go to the best universities in the country and also in our case in the rest of the world. This is something which we have been missing in many countries. In Estonia, yes, education is very equal and this still applies here, and our healthcare system is actually wonderful and it's also treating people really equally. But we have our own problems. I think the two problems which I mentioned are mainly worries for some other countries, particularly inequality of education systems, which I believe in Britain and in Central Europe is the main reason of hopelessness in middle class and poor people, among poor people. Because you know that I am poor and I'm failing my children. In Estonia or in Finland, if you're poor, you're not failing your children. You may choose an occupation which brings in nothing. You still can get your kids to the best university in the country. I think this is one element. But our populists actually do not feed on bad education or bad healthcare. They feed on something which is specific for Estonia. We have seen great economic development, which has lasted 30 years. This has been huge productivity rise. I mean, salaries has gone from about $30 to $1,400 on average. Huge development. On the other hand, of course, this means even quicker concentration of people in the town, even quicker concentration of investment in the capital. And we haven't been good in managing the side effects felt by people who, well, have been feeling like looking through the keyhole at our party. I mean, in the last 7 weeks, we've all been looking through keyholes, so you can imagine now how these people were feeling. Initially, we didn't have money to handle these side effects. Then I feel that we maybe neglected them a little bit. And now through this, let's say, recomposition of Estonian political landscape, we have learned that we need always to make sure that we do what politicians are meant to do. We take decisions to maximize the well-being of each and everyone. Of course, our political instincts and beliefs will have an impact on it, but this should be the main and overreaching objective, each and every one. And well, it sounds empty, but in reality, I think this is all behind this political turmoil, that we have too often forgotten about each and everyone, unless the state needs you to, I mean, serve in the army or something.
Well, on that ringing note of optimism and determination in Estonia and for the future of wider liberal democracy, we will come to an end. Our time is up. I want to thank my colleagues at SIPA for hosting this, the President's staff for their cooperation, most of all the President herself for her eloquence and insights. And we look forward, we wish you success at your meeting, important meeting at the UN Security Council on the 22nd of this month. And or 22nd of May, sorry, I think it was you said, and we hope to see you again on one of our SIPA webinars. Thank you very much indeed, or as you say in Estonia, suur aitäh.
Thank you, suur aitäh. See you.
Nägemist.
Nägemist. Bye.